Welcome to Southern Life. On today's video, we're going to explain the crisis that Florida is in the year 2023. We start the year off with stocks down, housing rents up, large cities like Orlando looking like ghost towns, more hurricane cleanup efforts than tourists. However, none of that compares to the secret crisis that's going on in Florida right now. I spent my morning analyzing statistics about overdose rates in Florida over the last 12 months, and the conclusion that I have come to, Florida has an overdose death rate of 35 per 100,000. I came up with this number myself after doing a lot of math. Luckily, after doing the math, which took hours, I found that the CDC had already published the information. And luckily, the numbers that I came up with were exactly the same numbers that the CDC published. We're also going to compare Florida's problem to a few other states so you can understand how serious the situation is in Florida compared to other states. Since the year 2020, all analytics across the entire United States for use have been going upwards at an unbelievable rate. But what does 35 people out of every 100,000 really mean? It means that you're 6 times more likely to overdose in the state of Florida than you are to be the victim of a homicide. We have all heard that Chicago is a dangerous city. Well, the murder rate in Chicago is 19 out of 100,000. That means you're almost twice as likely to die from an OD in Florida than you are to be murdered in the streets of Chicago. That's a total of about 8,000 people a year. The rate in the state of California is only 21, but we've been hearing that California is out of control. The statistics don't line up with the information that people are putting out there. The truth is that despite California having almost twice the population, they only had 2,000 people more a year. To give you an idea, the state of Texas, which is one of the lowest rated states, only had about 5,000 people last year, which means that Florida, which has 8 million residents less, still managed over 3,000 more victims a year. And this should just give you an idea of how bad the situation is in Florida. And the difference between Texas, 14 out of 100,000, and California, 21 out of 100,000, is only a relative difference. But Florida's whopping 35 out of 100,000 puts Florida in a much worse category than these two other states, which also have the largest populations in the country. So when you look at these numbers, you can understand that by volume and percentage of the population, the crisis in Florida is literally one of the worst in the country. Yes, California had 11,000 people, but they also have almost 40 million people in that state. Florida's situation is definitely a serious one. A lot of people have been regarding the situation, explaining that some states, based on their political affiliations, have a greater or larger problem. Is that really true though? We did some deep digging on these numbers in states and compared it to their political affiliation, and turns out that there's absolutely no correlation between the death rate from OD in the United States and political affiliation of how that state votes. In fact, we found that the top 3 states were Republican states, but the bottom 3 states were also Republican states. And the areas that have a very high rate that are democratically voting areas are relatively small states. So in fact, you could probably argue that Republican states have a worse problem. The state of West Virginia, for example, has a rate of 81 per 100,000. However, when you look at South Dakota, with a rate of only 10 per 100,000, which is also a Republican state, gives you an idea that the crisis in West Virginia is about 8 times worse than it is in South Dakota. But they're both Republican states, which means that there's no real political correlation between OD rates and politics of a state. And I want to put that out there because a lot of people are trying to blame this whole crisis on a state's particular political views. But when you look at the analytics, there's really no correlation. The only general correlation that can be found is that the western region of the United States has a much lower rate. Give you an idea, the lowest states that we found were Texas, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Just random states scattered across America. The highest, however, were West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Now these 3 states do border each other, but then they're followed by Delaware at 47, which is in a completely different region of the country. Connecticut, also very high, has no geographical connection to the rest of these places. So we can say if there was an epicenter for this problem, it would definitely be the Appalachian region of the United States, near the states of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Seems like to me, it's almost impossible to make any well-founded correlations between any of these analytics. Political standings on the states, racial matters even don't seem to have a bearing here. It seems like this is just a random problem scattered across America. One could try to make the point that the top 3 states are Republican. However, Delaware and Connecticut are not far behind, which just goes to show that this is a problem that's affecting everybody. And the message that's being put out there that this problem is, for example, people say the phrase democratic cities, very untrue. This is a problem that's affecting rural America like it's affecting big cities. So let's put away all this false information and false narratives that people are putting out about this crisis in the United States. What is really happening? Well, since the year 2020, the United States has really taken a dive for the absolute worst. And this problem has affected small towns just as it has big cities. And despite how much energy people put in the comment section of my channel trying to emphasize or prove that the root cause of this problem is somehow politics, really, all across America, people of all backgrounds and all types of political affiliations are finding their family members, are finding their families, the people that they love, their co-workers, and their neighbors dealing with something that the United States has never seen before. We know that in the 80s there was a few problems that went around the United States, but this is by far way worse. Here in the state of Florida, we don't have the absolute worst scenario, but we're not trailing far behind. Possible exposure of a police officer in Tavares, Florida. This week in Bradenton, Florida, I was listening to police radio and a 1-year-old child was exposed. Mother claims she's no longer a user, but that perhaps something could have still been left in the carpets or something. Her explanation really didn't make a lot of sense to me. But this is normal. This is the new trend in Florida. The new normal is to turn on the police radio every night and listen to these 8,000 cases a year unfold in our cities, sometimes in country towns, behind gas stations all over the state of Florida. This is taking place. 90% of these cases are the F, which is in fact working its way into every type of illicit product that you can reach. In fact, to give you some statistics, in the city of Phoenix, 1 million fake pills were discovered through a warrant. 10 million fake pills in 50 states. That means that it doesn't matter what you're taking, if it's not approved, there's a massive percentage that it could be laced and stained with F. On the same night, while listening to police radio here in Bradenton, Florida, a male claimed that he was on the green, which is not even against the law in many states now. And it turns out that it was laced, which means that you, the American consumer, need to wake up to the fact that everything that you obtain that is illicit has a massive possibility of being contaminated. That means that nothing is safe, and that you need to reconsider whether your notion of labeled recreational is really harmless, or if every single time you put something in your hands, you're taking your life in your hands as well. I want you to really grasp what is going on in Florida. And as I look at analytics, I was trying to find analytics that could clearly illustrate to you what's going on. The homeless rate in Florida is 13 out of 100,000. That means that for every homeless person you may see in your daily commute in Florida, that's 3 people who are now gone from an OD, which begs the question of some of these Florida cities where the homeless population is starting to disappear. I can't really draw conclusions on this, but I've noticed a few areas like Bradenton and North Fort Myers where we're seeing the homeless people just kind of disappear. When you put these numbers together and understand that a vast majority of homeless people are users, we can draw the conclusion that pretty much the homeless people are just all disappearing. A lot of them, namely, one of the leading causes of death according to the CDC right now in the United States. Do the math. If you wondered what happened to the homeless population in your town in Florida or in your neighborhood, it's a good possibility that the reason you're not seeing them anymore is because they're gone, and the cause of why they're gone, there you go. But just let that sink in. Homeless rate in Florida right now is 13 out of 100,000, but the OD rate is 35. That should just give you an idea of how many people are gone today in our communities due to this problem, and how serious of a threat it is to you, every single one of us as individuals. Perhaps you don't really consider yourself as being involved in anything. You consider that you can control the people you're around, and anything that you do is harmless. But remember, I was listening to police radio here in Bradenton, and a guy who was on some green said it was laced. He took a little bit of green and started to have effects. And if you don't believe me, just turn on the police radio in whatever city you live in and listen to that for a while, and it'll give you an idea of what's going on directly in your community. This is a serious problem that we're facing, and it's starting to reshape the people in our community. The ones who fall victim are gone, but their family members are still wondering, my child, my daughter, my son, my brother, my sister, why? Because again, they're finding their way into things that perhaps some people are being told are acceptable. Nobody automatically goes directly to the F and ends up homeless on a sidewalk. But have you found yourself in a party and wondered, what is in this drink? What is in this smoke? Because unfortunately, many times it's first-time exposure. In the case of this police officer in Tavares, Florida, she was just doing her job, wearing gloves, by the way. Our first responders and police officers now, when they're on the line of duty, front line every day, don't even know if they can touch the patients. So think too about who you associate with, who you let inside your car, whose house do you go into, because if they're doing these activities, all it takes is touching this stuff. Across the United States, 71,000 according to the CDC, and that means that in the state of Florida, 1 in 7 people across the country lost are here in our state of Florida. That should give you something to think about. So as you drive through your community in Florida and you see a homeless person, just remember, for every homeless person you see, statistically about 3 more are gone. I really hope they don't take this video down, because last time I did a video like this, they did. And I'm just trying to help people by putting out information. I found a really concerning correlation during this whole entire process, is that the last time that we had a rise in these types of situations was right before the recession of 2000 and 2008. Does that mean that all the symptoms that we're seeing now is just signs of a future economical collapse that's about to happen in the United States. I'll let you decide, because seeing those spikes in right before the recession and the spike that we're in now, to me, does seem like a correlation. Now, living in Florida during that time period, Florida was hit harder than anywhere else during those recessions. The foreclosures were out of control. Everything in Florida was chaotic compared to other parts of the country that were affected less. But when you look at these statistics now, you could imagine that our situation, if it was a correlation, it means that we're going to be looking forward to some very scary times.